Okay, so I'm doing 2 videos this week. I didn't expect to do this second video. And the reason being is I'm busy. I'm a bivocational pastor and trying to do things, trying to work, make a living, feed my family. You have things you have to do. But this came about today, and it was something that I never even heard of. And I'm a historian. I love history. But I never heard of this. One of the podcasts I listen to really is great. It has to do with urban legends and real life stuff. It's kind of interesting. A lot of that has to do with stuff that we hear or we don't hear that often, or we've never heard at all. Some of it could be urban legends. Some of it could be cryptozoology. Some of it could be actually like real stories that we've never heard of, and we don't understand their significance to us. And that was what I was listening to today. I never heard of the story of Prester John. And it turns out that this is a legend that ended up kind of becoming real in a way. And this is why I thought this was something I had to do a video of. Let me give you just a brief synopsis of Prester John. Now, Prester John was someone who supposedly was a king of a country. You have to understand this was around the 11th, 12th centuries. And if you know anything about that, you only knew basically the world around you. If you heard anything, it was word of mouth. It was stuff that people passed on. And for the most part, a lot of people didn't know what was real, what was not. In other words, in this day and age, we rally the call of fake news, or we'll sit there and say, well, this news agency leans left and this one leans right. In this day and age that I'm talking about, you basically believed everything that came to you. Think of the maps of the ocean that had sea monsters in it. That was because people actually said there were sea monsters. So the Prester John legend goes about during the Crusades, and basically the understanding that I have is Pope Alexander III was trying to rally money, and there was a letter that was sent out from this guy, Prester John. It was supposedly written to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel I. And basically this guy, Prester John, claimed to be one of the descendants of one of the 3 magi, and he was king of India. Now you have to understand, there's no way of really backing this up. This is the way things are. Anyway, basically, he was talking about the richness of the land. He was trying to get Europeans there to help defend the Holy Land, all sorts of stuff. And this was interesting because basically, after many years and many failed attempts, if you know anything about the Crusades, you know that there were crusades that were successful, and then there were crusades that we don't like to talk about. Look up the Children's Crusade if you've never studied much about the Crusades. But this is the thing. Pope Alexander III used this letter that came to him roughly around September 27th, 1177, in order to rally people to go before him, for him, to the Holy Land. And this was something, even though there was question about if this person really existed, why didn't he send emissaries? Why did he not himself travel? There was all sorts of things that people were questioning. So, for the lack of technology and the lack of, background checks and fact checking and everything else, there were people that were smart enough to say, let's look into this. Okay. But here's why the Pope used this. It brought a lot of people to his side, to his rally, to go to the Holy Land and defend against the Muslims. And that's the interesting thing of this. Now, as it is, we know now that this person never existed. There's a bunch of stuff out there that kind of say who this guy possibly was. But I think it's kind of an interesting story. And the reason why I bring this up is because we think about all the ways that we do have fact-checking these days, but we do have a way of doing things to kind of put our own narrative out there. We will say, this is the way something is, and we'll put out stats and interviews and everything that backs up the story. And then when somebody says, well, that isn't the fact, we sit there and we say, well, look, I've got the stats, I've got the stories, I've got the videos, I've got the interviews, I've got the letters, I've got all this. But we're only getting one side of the story. In fact, I can tell you, as somebody who has studied stats for a long period of time within the education system, you can create a narrative based on what you want. You can cherry pick things and say, this is what fact is. The biggest thing is when it comes to gun control, we have the two sides, those who are pro-guns, those who are anti-guns. And both sides will use the stats to put out their own narrative out there that says this is what this is and this is what this is. And what we get is the this and the that. And really, we're getting two sides of the same story. And the question then becomes, really, what is the truth? If we had all the stats ourselves, would we be able to really make an educated guess? An educated idea, an educated answer, an educated plan of action. And this is where I think the church, when we sit there and we hear stuff about certain people, we have to take those into fact. Right now, you think about how many pastors are being attacked right now, and whether or not you agree with those pastors, the question is the narrative painted against them because of the people putting the information out there are totally against them? What is the full story? Have you heard from those pastors themselves? What do they have? As I've heard recently, the saying is, what are their receipts to show the truth? And I mean, look at right now, the music industry, Christian music industry. We look at what's happening right now with Michael Tate, and I'll say his name because it's out there. We are hearing all this stuff that this has been something that was known, not just by the newsboys, but within all of Christian music. And then we've got to ask ourselves, do we support the Christian music industry anymore because they were hiding this fact? And there are a number of now former Christian musicians coming out saying that it goes deeper than this. There's a lot more there. And you're hearing their stories. And I can go back myself and say there was a CCM article that featured John Elefante around, I think, somewhere between 1995 and 1998. And he said it in there that one of the issues he had with Christian music with the Christian music industry is they were not putting people there to keep the musicians accountable. And he even hinted that there was stuff going on within the industry. So for me, that's a receipt. That's something where I sit there and I say, okay, that's something I remember. And it's something that now I'm seeing, 30 years later, where this is becoming something that is alarming. And why haven't they been doing something? And so it just really gets this up. So why I'm bringing up this Prester John thing is people used something to create a narrative, to do something that they wanted to. You can look this up. Prester, Prester, John. And you can read what this story is and find out how this narrative just creates something. And this is why we talk about having discernment. Now, I know a lot of people argue against discernment ministries now because it's, in some ways it's somewhat one-sided. You're only getting one side of the story. We do have to do our education. That's why I always tell my people here at the church, and I always say, we have to be Bereans. We have to sit there and weigh the facts with the Bible. We have to sit there and we have to look into everything and find out if what we're being told is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so this is why I'm bringing this up, is I just heard this story and I thought to myself, how many people out there that have a YouTube channel that are telling us one side of the story are really doing their due diligence, and how many people that are listening are doing their due diligence. We're told to test everything in the Bible. The Bible tells us, test everything. Are we truly testing everything? I really have that question. I really have a doubt that people are testing everything. They're either going with what they're told to believe by their pastor, by a YouTube personality. And I know you're watching me on YouTube right now and you're sitting there hearing what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is go and check this out. Prester John, very interesting story. There's a whole wiki page on this. I know Wikipedia is not the be-all and end-all, but this gives you an idea of what there is out there, and there are citations in the page. Let me see, 61 citations, 64 citations. 64 citations. There's some interesting stuff there. And then there's sources that tell you the different stories out there about him. But this is why I'm saying this. If this Prester John, who supposedly existed, was used as a means for a religious leader to get his way, this is why we as Christians must do our due diligence and not just listen to what this person or that person says, but to do our own study and not just get the one-sided story. Look and get both sides of the story. So that's all I'm going to say at this time. God bless. Talk to you later.